Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Aglaia. This is the new Alliance raid made available by patch 6.1 in Final Fantasy XIV Newfound Adventure. If you find yourself unable to handle the scale of this raid or have trouble hammering in mechanics, this guide has got you covered. My name is Miztech and I'll be your raid guide. We begin by facing off against BYREGOT. Ordeal of Thunder will deal high raid-wide damage. Healers beware. BYREGOT'S strike will form a blue circle on the platform that the boss will leap to, knocking back all players from its center. Players will need to avoid getting knocked into the outer edge or they'll be afflicted by an electrocution debuff. BYREGOT'S ward will deal high damage to the primary target. Cooldown and heal as necessary. Builder's build will cause the boss to glow and the next strike attack will be accompanied by an extra cross-shaped AoE, indicated by the glowing yellow lightning effect around the boss. Players will need to position themselves around the knockback circle in such a way to also avoid the incoming cross attack or they'll take high damage and get debuffed. Next up, the boss will change the arena and players will have to keep an eye out for these hammers that will form on the outer edges throughout the phase. These hammers will push the platform segments in front of them one column over underneath the players and the boss. All players must ensure they're standing on a safe segment to avoid falling to their deaths. As such, you never want to stand on the edge segment about to get hit by a hammer or you will die. After the initial hammer hit, the boss will bring down another hammer somewhere on the available platform that will soon blast out in a straight line. At the same time, an edge hammer will target this section and players can expect the hammer to be pushed with this section before it explodes. To handle this, players will need to identify which direction the line hammer will be pushed and move away from the area before it does to avoid getting hit. During the next round of edge hammers, the boss will relocate to the north and begin to cast BYREGOT'S Spire, dealing massive damage across 3 rows. This attack does not resolve until after the hammers push the platforms around, so players can first position themselves in a safe segment and then quickly adjust out of the way of the Spire attack once the segments have been repositioned. At this point, the boss will move into the center and reform the original arena. From here on out, phase 1 mechanics will repeat. When the boss casts Reproduce, 5 clones will form at the edge of the arena that will send out AoE circle attacks all the way across the platform. Players will have to pay close attention to which clones are glowing, as these attacks will move significantly faster across the platform than the non-glowing attacks, and players can use this to their advantage to dodge between the rows of attacks appropriately. Eventually, the boss will return to the center and the platform will reform again. Players will need to watch out for the hammer attacks in the same manner as before. Be sure to pre-position appropriately to avoid each mechanic, including gravity. All of these mechanics will repeat until the boss is defeated. Up next, we deal with RALGR'S pet, a mini trash boss. This boss will face a random direction and slowly cast disruptive static. All players will need to move behind the boss to avoid the incoming room-wide cleave attack. The boss can also summon destructive charges that will move across the arena and along opposite edges to form 2 massive pizza slices that will deal high damage and debuff anyone caught inside of them. As soon as the charges begin to move, players will need to move to the safe quadrants to avoid getting hit. Lightning Bolt will form 3 sets of circle attacks underneath random players that all players should avoid. When the boss casts bolts from the blue, healers can expect high rate damage. At this point, mechanics will repeat with some overlap. Bolt Loop will form large AoE circles on the platform that will grow into larger donut attacks with each hit. Dodge these as necessary. Destructive Strike will target the primary target for a heavy-hitting Tankbuster. Cooldown and heal. All of these mechanics will repeat until the boss is destroyed. The second boss is RALGR. Lightning Rain will deal high raid-wide damage. When the boss casts Advent of the Eight, 2 large portals, one blue and one orange, will form on the north side of the arena. The boss will then cast Hand of the Destroyer through one of these portals, pounding anything caught on that side of the arena. To avoid getting hit, players will need to identify the large tether during the Hand of the Destroyer cast that will link to either the blue or orange portal, and then move to the opposite side of the arena. Broken World will place a proximity-based damage marker somewhere on the platform. Players will need to move away from it to reduce damage. When the boss casts RALGR'S Beacon, a purple circle will form on the arena that will knock back all players from its center. To avoid getting knocked off, players will need to get knocked into the fingers of the arena. You'll be able to use the green arrows radiating out from the knockback circle to identify which fingers align safely with the incoming knockback trajectory. Destructive Bolt will target all 3 tanks with heavy-hitting Tankbusters that also deal splash damage around them. The tanks will need to move away from others to avoid overlap. Cooldown and heal as necessary. Advent of the Eighth can now form a tilted portal on the northeast or northwedge edge of the arena. The boss will then cast Broken World and the proximity-based damage marker can form on the side of the tilted portal. The boss then will cast Hand of the Destroyer, and if the tilted portal is tethered, the incoming meteor will be punched by the boss and broken into many pieces that will then fling out towards the arena that was originally deemed safe. To handle this, players can ignore the original proximity marker and stand on it to avoid the incoming proximity-based damage from the shards of the meteor that get punched away. The boss can also jump to the center and cast Bronze Work. Players will need to dodge the first set of alternating AoE attacks before moving in to dodge the second. At the same time, players will need to watch their feet to avoid the overlapping AoE circle attacks. At this point, a tilted portal and a regular portal can form during Advent of the 8th. If the normal portal is tethered during Hand of the Destroyer, players will need to avoid that side while also moving away from the proximity-based damage marker to minimize damage. Players targeted by circle AoE attacks should move away from others to avoid overlap. Hell of Lightning will form a number of lightning orbs around the arena. Players will have to move away from these to avoid getting hit when they eventually explode. This attack can overlap with RALGR'S beacon, and players will need to identify the safe knockback finger that isn't also affected by a lightning orb. All of these mechanics will repeat until the boss is defeated. Up next, we face off against a pair of lion mini-bosses. Double Immolation will deal high raid-wide damage. When the lions begin to cast Slash and Burn, one will form a large point-blank AoE around it, while the other is casting a large donut attack. These attacks overlap, and players will need to look closely at each lion's head and identify the numbers indicating the order of attack. The lion marked with 1 will attack first, while the lion marked with 2 will attack second. As such, players will need to move to avoid the attack of the first lion before quickly adjusting to dodge the attack from the second lion. Roaring Blaze will have each lion targeting the half of the room directly in front of them. Again, identify the numbers over their heads to identify which attack goes off first. Dodge each attack by standing behind the appropriate lion in turn. These double overlapping attacks will continue until one of the lions is destroyed. The remaining lion will throw out the same mechanics by itself until it is destroyed. Up next, we face off against Azema. Warden's Prominence will deal high raid-wide damage. Solar Wings will target both sides of the boss for large cleave attacks. Players will need to move directly behind or in front of her to avoid getting hit. Immediately after, SUNSTORM Orbs will form that will soon explode in wide circles. Avoid as necessary. Warden's Warmth will target all 3 tanks with heavy-hitting Tankbusters, but also have very large splash damage circles around them. The tanks will need to move away from others to avoid overlap. During the next SUNSTORM Orb spawn, the boss will cast Sunshine, and a number of clones will appear around the arena. These clones will push away any orbs in front of them, and players will need to pre-position to avoid getting hit by the orb explosions. Solar Fans will begin with a line attack in front and behind the boss that will send the boss's fans to the outer edges of the arena. The boss will then cast Radiant Rhythm, and the fans will begin to rotate counterclockwise, 1 quadrant at a time. When the boss casts Radiant Finish, all players will need to move far away from the 2 fans as they will explode in massive AoE circles. The boss can also turn towards a random direction and cast Fleeting Spark. This is a massive 270-degree cleave attack in front of her, and all players must quickly move behind her to avoid getting hit. Solar Fold is a cross-shape attack that all players should avoid. This attack will also form 4 fire lines that will grow across the arena and divide the room into 4 quadrants. The boss will then cast Sunshine, and her clones and their fans will appear again. These clones will push the fire lines to cover the quadrant directly in front of them, so players will need to identify the safe quadrant that isn't affected by a clone and move into that quadrant for safety. The boss will jump into the center of the room and cast Wildfire Ward, a massive room-wide attack with the only safe zone being the triangle in the very center of the arena. 3 clones will then form in succession that will throw out knockback attacks in the order that they spawn. Players will need to quickly adjust to the side of the triangle closest to the first knockback and position themselves to be knocked towards the opposite point of the triangle to avoid excess fire damage. As they do this, they'll need to watch the order of the next 2 knockbacks closely. After the first knockback, quickly reposition for the second knockback and then reposition again for the third and final knockback. When the boss casts Noble Dawn, she'll form a large orb in the center of the room. This orb will throw out 3 sets of fire petals that will grow over time before exploding. To avoid getting hit, players can dodge close to the first set of growing petals, and once they explode, move into those areas to avoid the remaining sets of petals. When the boss casts Sublime Sunset, she'll move next to the center orb and face a random direction. Players will need to move behind her as she will soon kick the orb to the edge of the arena, dealing very high proximity-based damage. These mechanics will repeat with some overlap and increased difficulty until the boss is defeated. The final boss is Naldthal. Anytime the boss casts As Above, So Below, the platform will change and players will need to be aware of either the blue or orange background or the blue or orange lanterns floating around. The boss will then cast Heat Above, Flames Below, and 2 telegraphs will form over the arena, a large blue room-wide donut and an orange point-blank circle centered underneath the boss. The color of the arena background or lanterns will indicate which of these AoE telegraphs is going to deal damage. If the background or lanterns are blue, players are safe to stand in the orange area, and vice versa. versa. Heaven's Trial will target random players with these cleave attacks that can be moved away from others, while another player is targeted for stack up. If you're not affected by one of the cleave attacks, stack with the affected player to reduce damage. Golden Tenet will target the primary target for a 3-stack Tankbuster. All 3 tanks will need to stack together to soak the incoming damage with cooldowns. During the next platform change, the boss can cast Far Above, Deep Below, and players from each alliance will be targeted by these dark blue circle attacks that will chase them around the arena for a short while. Another player will be marked for a lineup marker. If you're not affected by the blue circle marker, stack up with the affected player to share the incoming damage. Immediately after, the players marked with the blue circles will need to leave their circle attacks away from others until they disappear. When the boss casts Once Above, Ever Below, a number of blue and orange circles will form over the arena with arrow indicators showing their eventual trajectory. Again, players will use the background or lantern colors to identify which circles are dangerous and move away from them and their incoming paths. The circles of the opposite color will do nothing, and players are safe to use those areas to dodge the danger circles as necessary. When the boss casts Hell of Fire, all players must identify the side of the boss that the laser light show is coming out of, and move to the opposite side to avoid getting hit. Wayward Soul will spawn a number of orbs that will slowly fall to the platform and explode. Players will need to move away from these to avoid getting hit. A lot of orbs will spawn here in various patterns, so be light on your feet. Once all orbs have exploded, the encounter will continue. The boss will move to the edge, cast Fire It Up 1, and a pillar will form somewhere on the platform. The boss will then cast Fire It Up 2, and another pillar will form elsewhere on the platform. These pillars will be numbered in the order that the boss targets them, and the attack they will throw up can be identified by looking at the marker above the pillar during each cast. This orange wavy circle thing indicates a knockback attack from that pillar. This blue circle indicates a point-blank AoE attack from that pillar. Once you know what to expect from each pillar, players can pre-position to avoid getting hit or knocked into the wall. Up to 3 pillars can form with either attack, and players will need to pre-position to avoid all 3 attacks as necessary. When the boss casts Soul's Measure, the arena will be divided into a light and dark side, and a large scale will appear on the north edge. 3 Soul Vessel ads will appear on the platform, and each player from each alliance will be tethered to one. Run to the ad that you're tethered to and begin to destroy it. The ads cannot be moved, but they will throw out a number of AoE attacks. Dodge as necessary and be ready to stack with the affected healer in your alliance. Once all the ads are destroyed, another scale will form and all players will have a weight marker appear above their heads. The dead ads will also have triple weight markers over them, and the goal is to balance each side of the arena or you will die. Luckily, the scale on the north will update in real time as players move from side to side, so there is no need for any elaborate math strategies. Make sure the scale is balanced before the boss finishes their cast or you will die. After an epically elaborate cutscene, the encounter will resume. STYGIAN Tenet will target each tank with a heavy-hitting Tankbuster. The tanks will need to move away from others and pop their cooldowns. From here on out, all mechanics will repeat with some overlap until the boss is defeated. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Up next, we'll head into the new Extreme Trial. Till next time.